Okay, my name is Gary Wiggert. I'm a police officer in St. Louis City. I have been for 33 and a half years. I have to start off with this statement, always with a disclaimer. Any comments made by me here are solely my comments and are not the official comments of the St. Louis Police Department. So I've been lobbying in Jefferson City for a number of years on the side, besides doing the police job. And so when my department found out in a newspaper article that I was hired as a lobbyist for Show Me Cannabis, it had been approved until they found out it was Show Me Cannabis. So my lobbying was revoked by the police department, and they called me in and basically told me that I couldn't speak to the press and I was not allowed to lobby. So what I had to do was I had to bring on a lawyer and sue. And I do know that people never give up their First Amendment rights, but I obeyed that rule. I'm a police officer. I believe in the rules. I believe in orders. But I did take them to court, and we won. So now I am able to lobby. So I think that's a good first step victory here for us. The second thing is, this is funny. When I sued them, they waited until the last day before the court them to either say approve or non-approval. They finally approved it for me, and so they waited up until the last day so they wouldn't be in violation. They gave me the letter allowing me to lobby, and then the next day they called me down and made me give a urine test. So, I mean, supposedly it was random. I don't believe it was random. I don't think anybody believes it's random, but that's the rules. And that's another thing too here. When it comes to marijuana use, I'm one of those people who have never smoked marijuana in my life. I've never participated, really never had any desire, and I still don't have any desire. And so that isn't what motivates me on this. Really what motivates me is over these years, I have made hundreds of marijuana arrests over the years. I've made thousands of narcotics arrests. After all these years, there really hasn't been any effect in marijuana use from when I first came on. You still see people with the same amounts of marijuana. After making all those arrests over the year, it really hasn't had an effect on anything. And I tell you what, over time, you can see that how society has changed. When I first came on as a police officer, if you made a marijuana arrest, all the older coppers would basically make fun of you. I worked in an area of St. Louis, a high crime area. We had a lot more important problems than marijuana. A lot more important problems. So if you made a marijuana arrest, everyone pretty much made fun of you. And so police officers really stopped making these little minor marijuana arrests. Well, what happens is now as police work changes, we now have, has anybody ever heard of hotspot policing? Where you grab police officers and you put them into a high crime area. And you go into this area, and so show that you're being effective. You want to show that you make an arrest. And so what's the easiest arrest to make out there? Is you stop somebody and you pat them down and maybe you feel some marijuana or they throw it down and you see it. And so you make an arrest. And it comes up with a drug arrest, that you've made a drug arrest and you're really, when in fact it's really pretty much nothing. And so then we have other things that we do now too. Not only you have hotspot policing, but police cars in St. Louis, cameras in the car. So now you pull over somebody and you find, you might smell the marijuana smoke coming out of the car. You might search the car and you find a blunt. You find something very small. Well, guess what, folks? You are now on camera as a police officer. You can't throw that away like police have always done in the past or throw it in the sewer. You have to make that arrest. So what's happening out here is police officers are now making more marijuana arrests because we have lost our discretion. Before we knew that it was pretty much if in fact a crime, but now we are forced to have to go ahead and make these arrests, and that's why you see these number of arrests climbing. And I think we have to check, but I think, is it what, 40% of all drug arrests are marijuana in the state of Missouri? I think that's the number I heard. So that's pretty staggering, especially when you realize that, in St. Louis we have a huge heroin problem and a crack problem. You hear outstate you have the meth problem, yet 40% of our arrests are marijuana. I always tell this story. I was detached to a street corner apprehension team, and what that is someone goes in and buys some drug, and then we swoop in and we lock up the person, and then they have the marked money and we know who they are. Well, we had a number of incidents in St. Louis where it was crack dealers, and they were basically robbing some of their customers, and we had a couple of murders there. So I was detached to go and arrest these crack dealers. So we would go to these locations where they're selling drugs, and we had to actually chase away the marijuana dealers because we were concentrated on the coke, and that was our problem. But we had so many marijuana dealers. So that tells you that we're not even going to make that case because we got more important things to do. And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that a police officer, it takes a lot of time to book someone, it takes a lot of time to write the report, you have to convey them to the station, and for the most part, these cases are thrown out. So I mean, these are just cases that take a lot of police officers' time, and it's a waste of taxpayer money. And also, as I was introduced before, I'm also the lobbyist for the St. Louis Tea Party. And the St. Louis Tea Party looks at this as something that is not really being fiscally responsible. There's a freedom issue here. There's also the freedom issue that it's not up to the federal government to tell the people here in the state of Missouri what we have to do, whether it's growing industrial hemp or making drug arrests. That the federal government should have no role in that. That should be up to each individual state. Just like this should be up to this state here, whether we choose to legalize it or not up to the federal government. And I always wrap this up with one quick little statement here. All these years I've been a police officer, I've seen people, they knock little ladies down and take their purses to support their drug habit, but it's always been heroin or meth or crack. That's who does these burglaries, that's who does these robberies. No one knocks down a little old lady to support buying marijuana. And right now, we've got a real epidemic right now in St. Louis with the heroin, where people are overdosing on heroin. And what happens is that sometimes they get some heroin that hasn't been stepped on, and they get a pretty strong portion, and they die. But you don't see anyone out here dying either on marijuana. So thank you for allowing me to come speak. And I think I'll let some other folks here talk a little bit probably about our legislation. We had a number of bills up there, and talk about hopefully what we will be doing in the future up in Jefferson City. I got Amber. She's going to come up, and thank you. I have to take this. Talk into this.
I don't have any real pockets.
While they're working with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Amber. Amber is a member of Show Me Cannabis Regulation, and she's been with the organization since the very start, back in 2011. And she is based out of Kansas City now, and we didn't know she was actually going to be able to join us until just last night, but we are very pleased that she was able to make the trip down to Jefferson City today, and also to be with us here tonight.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for coming out. This is a great turnout. We've been getting a lot of really good turnout around Missouri for these events, and it's just getting bigger all the time, and it's really exciting. I've been involved with this movement for many, many years, and we've reached, I think, a turning point. We're not there yet, so we still have to keep working. And once we get legalization, we have to remain vigilant so that our opposition does not try and take away the gains that we've made. But things are very encouraging and really moving ahead. I guess I kind of just wanted to give my background and my story. I grew up in West Plains, Missouri, so rural southern Missouri. Some of you might know that area. And I probably grew up in similar circumstances to a lot of you. It was, kind of isolated, and we didn't have the internet back in those days. And, I was a good girl. I, went to church and all of those things. I was, strong in school, and I didn't really think much about marijuana. Didn't think much about marijuana policy. And I got to college. I went to the agriculture school at the University of Missouri, and there was a woman who had a table sitting out one day and for an event, and she was talking about hemp, industrial hemp. I'd never heard about this, and it's basically the same thing as the marijuana plant, except you can't get high from it, and it's got all of these industrial applications. And did you know that you can make paper from it? Oh, wow. I'm an environmentalist. I didn't know you could make paper out of that. I thought you had to make paper out of trees. And you mean we can grow a plot of hemp in 6 months and make the same amount of paper that it would take 20 years to grow a stand of trees? Huh. Oh, you can make clothing out of it? well, I know that 40% of the pesticide use in this country goes towards cotton, so we could grow something that doesn't require a bunch of pesticides, and that would be good for our water, so we could do this, but wait, it's illegal? Why is it illegal? The marijuana laws. Oh, well, that seems backwards. Well, let's try and do something to change this. So I got active. I got involved with the Student Normal chapter and helped to start a Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter there. And you know, I'll be honest, at the very beginning, I wasn't sure that marijuana should be legal. I thought, well, hemp needs to be legal, and I'm very angry that it's illegal. And Missouri was the #2 producer of hemp before this was made illegal, and our farmers could grow it, and this would be very good for us. But you know, I was always told marijuana was bad, and you know, it's wrong, and maybe, you know, we shouldn't send the wrong message to the young people, even though I was a young person at the time, and I knew I was responsible, but I don't know. So it was kind of like this. I think there was even actually a Maneater, the student newspaper, quoting me saying that I don't know that marijuana should be legal, and I'm here representing a marijuana legalization organization. But I got to researching it, and I ended up taking a pharmacology class as an undergraduate, and in my pharmacology class back in 2000 at the University of Missouri, they list all of the model drugs that you can use for different types of symptoms. So for example, if you have pain, you want an opiate, right? It's dangerous, but if you have pain, you want an opiate. So that's what they listed, and they go through all of the major symptoms, and then when it comes to emesis or nausea, they said cannabis in my pharmacology text in 2000 at the University of Missouri, and I was like, what? I mean, I knew this, I'd heard this, and about that time, you know, medical marijuana was starting to become a big thing. They were getting, they got to where they passed their dispensary law in California, and so people were actually able to access their medicine, and all these stories came out, and you know, especially with cancer and AIDS patients, you know, using this as a life-saving medicine, you know, it became real to me. And you know, my father died of cancer a week before my 6th birthday, and he used cannabis, and I'm not sure that my mom wants me to say that publicly. She never did. But I think back and I think, you know, if that extended my dad's life 1 month, that's a really long time for a 5-year-old. And there are 5-year-olds around the country who want to keep their dads and their moms and their grandmas and their grandpas as long as they can. And so I started thinking about the medical aspect, and I'm like, okay, we really have to do something about this. And it became more meaningful. And then I got more involved, and I started thinking, you know, okay, so the moral thing, like, I don't know, it's supposed to be a bad thing, but the truth of the matter is that these policies don't work. Whether or not I think it's good or bad for somebody to use it, you know, it's still out there. People are still using it. The laws have not worked. We've had this war on marijuana since 1937, and when's it going to work? When's it going to work? We're waiting. We've been putting people in prison, and it's not working. And when you get down to it, the fact of the matter is that it's a moral argument keeping it illegal, but the reason to make it legal, as John was saying, is a moral reason. You know, taking parents away from their kids and putting them in prison does not help our society. Not when they are otherwise tax-paying, law-abiding citizens who are using a substance that maybe they're using it for health reasons. Maybe they just want to use that instead of alcohol, which is objectively more harmful. And so, you know, coming to all of these conclusions, I got involved, and I was part of the campaign in Columbia in 2004. To decriminalize marijuana there and implement a medical marijuana law there, and I started seeing the results. You know, I had the first time that a person ever came to me and said, you know, your law is helping to save my life. I knew I couldn't stop. And so since then, I've been to Washington, D.C. I worked for Students for Sensible Drug Policy out there. I worked out in California on Prop 19 in 2010, and I worked for Americans for Safe Access, working for medical cannabis patients out there. And I came back to Missouri in 2012, and it was far-fetched, and people were looking at me like I was crazy, like, why are you leaving California to go to Missouri? because it's my home, and because, you know, there are a lot of people there who support it, and there's a lot of people who need it, and we need to have that conversation in the middle of the country. And frankly, also, Missourians are a lot smarter than you think. Thank you very much. So I came back, and I've been honored to be part of the Show Me Cannabis effort ever since then. And while we did not get on the ballot in 2012, as John has said, this has sparked a conversation which is really catalyzing a movement. And I want to say that, you know, throughout the country, other people who are working on this issue are starting to actually look at Missouri and say, we need to do it there. Because when we do it there, everybody else is going to be paying attention. And the fact of the matter is that we do have support. We do have people who need it, who are understanding the issue, but it's been taboo. You know, I'm, like I said, I'm from West Plains. People do not like to talk politics. When I still go home now, people are like, oh yeah, you're that marijuana girl. But they agree with me. They just don't want to say it to everybody else. And so I appreciate everybody coming out here, and I encourage you to continue this conversation. It's not as taboo as it was. We are moving forward. The wind is at our backs, but obviously the battle's not over. We haven't finished it here in Missouri. But as I said, you know, we have to remain vigilant after we do get this law passed. We have to keep fighting for the rights of people, because this is a civil liberties issue. You know, again, going back to the morality of it, it's a human rights issue to me. I have noticed time and time again the way that the opposition has managed to silence so many people for so long is the stigmatization. You are a drug user and you're a bad person. You do not deserve civil liberties. Let me see what you've got in your butt, you know? And that, I mean, it's offensive. It's not right. And people who use cannabis are people. And you're valid. You have rights, and you should not be cowed, you should not be ashamed, and you should not be afraid to talk about this issue, because it is moral. It is the right thing to do to legalize this. It is the right thing to stop putting innocent people in prison, clogging up our criminal justice system, and wasting money that could be used for education, for you know, mental health care, which is probably what is driving a lot of people to end up abusing substances in the first place. So I think there's probably a lot of people in here who know all of the arguments, and I don't want to belabor the points, but you know, I just want to encourage everyone to keep speaking. Don't be afraid. We still have freedom of speech, so please go out there and use it. Please continue to be involved with Show Me Cannabis. Write your state representatives. Those are very important people to write. You know, whether or not we do a ballot initiative this year for 2014, we're going to be working on things in the legislature, and they want to hear from you. Don't be scared. That's what they signed up for. So let me know how you feel. Be polite, be nice, but just be part of the movement. So thank you, everybody, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Tony.
I'd like to appreciate, or you know, very thankful that Show Me Cannabis and John were able to invite me here tonight. And I'm sure that most of you probably were shocked or never thought you'd have an opportunity to hear from two police officers in one setting talk about legalizing marijuana. I never expected. So I guess I just recently, the term I've been using has come out of the closet for legalization of marijuana. And just kind of give you a background, I've got just over, or right at 20 years of law enforcement experience. I've been in Missouri for like the last 5 as a police chief. And again, I don't speak on behalf of the city. These are, you know, personal testimony on behalf of marijuana legalization and the aspects. And kind of what got me involved in it is in about the last 2 years, I've looked back over my law enforcement career and I've looked at the current state of the culture of law enforcement. And I've seen militarized raids and militarization of the police departments, a disconnect from the citizens that we serve, the communities that we serve, and I started asking myself, why have we become the enemy? And I think a lot of that aspect is it comes from the drug war, it comes from federal overreach within the states, our cities tied to grants that make them enforce laws that normally the citizens wouldn't want enforced. So I got involved with a group called Oath Keepers. I met a gentleman named Sheriff Richard Mack from out in the Utah, Arizona area who runs Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. We actually had the national conference this year in St. Charles, and I was able to get named to the board of directors for that organization. So that was able to direct for me some energy into trying to change the culture of law enforcement. And also in that aspect, then I started thinking, what are other things I need to address, I think, and be kind of more open about. In the last 10 years, I think, in the back of my mind, just as a lot of people had said here, is that we knew eventually this was going to be a topic that had to be discussed. With the recent events in Colorado and Washington, it's kind of pushed it to the forefront. So now more states are starting to think about that, and conversations that were happening behind closed doors and in private are now more public. So people are starting to ask themselves, why isn't it legal? Why can't we make medical marijuana happen in all states? And so I started kind of looking at that aspect. I'm also a Republican. I have a libertarian, cast to me, so I'm a part of a group called Republican Liberty Caucus, which is pretty much libertarian-leaning Republicans, and we shoot for a lot of different aspects, one of which is legalization. Another aspect is as Gary kind of talked about, is when you look at the aspect of scaling down federal government, what's the ways that we can scale down federal government? If you give the drug laws back to the states and end all federal drug laws, then you no longer need the DEA. So now you've just saved billions of dollars every year, and for future years, turn the drug laws back over to the states. If you're worried about illegal elements of drugs being brought into the United States, turn that over to U.S. Customs. So you just totally dissolve the DEA according to the Republican Liberty Caucus. That's what we shoot for. State laws then take back over, and then each state can determine how they want to handle the issue of cannabis or any other drug for that matter. I met John at CPAC. He came around, was talking to us at the Republican Liberty Caucus table, gave me his information, and I was very interested because I didn't really know that Missouri was even close to making this a public discussion. So I started following him on Facebook and the Show Me Cannabis Facebook page, and started realizing that I was really interested in seeing which direction this was going to go. We brought in a gentleman who is Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that before. If you go to the website, leap.cc, it's law enforcement officers, current and retired. They're now starting to come out and say that the drug war has failed, prohibition has failed, and we have to come up with a better aspect. Like Gary said earlier, I've never used marijuana before. Another side note is I'm a devout Mormon, so I don't even drink caffeine, I don't drink alcohol, and I also do not take any type of tobacco. So if you could legalize marijuana tomorrow, it does me no good personally at all. So I have no, a lot of people say, well, anybody that shows up for Show Me Cannabis and speaks out on legalization is a pothead. And honestly, 15 years ago, if somebody told me they want to legalize marijuana, that was the idea I had. The picture of Cheech and Chong and half-baked movies, and we always think of. Yeah, we all watched them, laughed at them, and it was kind of the perception that people always have. So whenever I noticed a little while back that John had a meeting down in, I don't know if it's Cape Girardeau or something, where there was a law enforcement officer. And a next day or two after the meeting, the gentleman posted some very derogatory terms about people who were involved in the movement, just pretty much saying that they were welfare, recipients and unemployed and uneducated. And at that time, still hadn't really spoke to John about wanting to be involved. And I got to thinking about how many people I knew when I was in college that smoked marijuana, how many police officers who formerly smoked marijuana before they became police officers, and I thought, of all the people I know that smoke marijuana, none of them to this day are on welfare. And a lot of them are holding very high-paid jobs. I know one right now that's a practicing psychiatrist in Chicago that has a PsyD, has a master's, has a bachelor's degree. And I got to thinking, why is it, if this is such a horrible drug, why isn't all these people that smoke marijuana at some point now going crazy and on heroin? So I finally got to talking to someone one day, and they said, well, ask yourself this: what do you think happens if marijuana is legalized tomorrow? And I started thinking, I thought, well, you always hear the story about it's a gateway drug. Well, then surely within 6 months we're going to have all these people on heroin. So I started thinking about that. I thought, well, if it gets legalized tomorrow, why would we have an upshoot of people smoking marijuana? Because honestly, if you want to smoke marijuana today, you're smoking marijuana. No one is sitting at their house right now waiting for this bill to pass so they can go out and buy marijuana. Let's be honest, it's not happening. So we have to just admit the prohibition aspect has failed. Failed during alcohol prohibition, it's failing us now. So something has to be done. Whether it's a small step at a time, or if we can get full legalization all at one time, for recreational like Colorado and Washington, we have to start making this a public discussion. So whenever I joined LEAP, right after I met Neil in St. Louis, and I contacted John and told him I was interested. I contacted Leap. Matter of fact, Leap had contacted me about missing this event and speaking in Kentucky, because Kentucky is now trying to have a marijuana law. And they wanted me to go to the capital of Kentucky and speak at a hearing they were having, but I felt since Missouri is my current home state that I wanted to kind of come here tonight and help John and be in Jeff City. So you have to start looking. We have to, one, as a law enforcement officer, the reason why I joined LEAP, I am active, I'm not retired, so I can take back at the job, for mayors. So you have a lot of police officers nowadays that behind closed doors will say that they favor legalization, a lot more than what people would expect. But they can't be outspoken about it, because certain areas, if you have a mayor that's very, Christian conservative or whatever, or a board, or people make a stink about it, they'll get fired. But behind closed doors, there is a large, growing number of police officers that have said it's enough, legalization of marijuana needs to take place, prohibition is not working. So understand that there is that movement in the background that is happening. So there is change taking place along a lot of lines. So I want you to ask whatever questions y'all can tonight, stay active. One thing about LEAP and Show Me Cannabis and RLC is these are organizations that a lot of people never thought they'd get support from. Right now LEAP has a huge number of active members. These are active police officers, retired police officers that a lot of people, 10 years ago we wouldn't have heard from. The Tea Party, Republican Liberty Caucus, now you're starting to, if anybody in here tonight thinks that this is a partisan, can't get Republicans and Democrats to agree on it, then we're losing. If you aren't speaking to anybody of every party, you need to. There's posts sometimes on different websites that say, well, it won't pass in Missouri because there's too many Republicans in Missouri. Well, there's 3 Republicans I know at the table tonight, and it's not going to pass if only one party's pushing it. We have to have both parties doing it. If you think that Democrats are all for it, none of them are against it, well then go talk to people in California, because most of all major Democrats in California were against it last time. So it's going to take both parties. Don't say, I'm not going to talk to so-and-so because they're this party or that party. Talk to everybody you can about it. Come out of the closet. Contact your representatives. I was very surprised today whenever we were in the city talking to the state house members there of how many of them were very open to hearing about this. Very surprised. There was 1 or 2 today that we spoke to that I would never thought would have gave us 2 minutes of their time to even talk to about this. So one thing you have to remember though is they are, I guess they're kind of pushed and prodded by phone calls and by support. And if they think that they're going to have more support from people who want it legalized and they're not going to get that backlash, then they're more willing to kind of come out and co-sponsor bills. So go home tonight, figure out who your state senator is, your state house member is, and just once a week, email them once a week, tell them this is something you want to see happen. So if nothing else tonight, learn to stay active, learn that support from this is coming from a lot of different aspects, a lot of different lifestyles. Police officers, lawyers, attorneys, business people are coming out for this now. So stay with it, stay active. The only way to get this done is to keep pushing it and let people know that it's time for Missouri to change. Thanks.
All right, before I introduce our final panelist, I just want to return to the theme that Amber and I both discussed, that this is a human rights issue, and there's a case that I did not mention before. I would be remiss if I didn't mention it now, but there's a gentleman serving life without parole in the state of Missouri right now for a nonviolent cannabis offense. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about him, but his name's Jeff Mazansky. He's from Sedalia, and he had 2 prior offenses, and so they tried him as a prior and persistent offender. But he was the final offense was he had driven a guy to a hotel, and that guy picked up 4 pounds of marijuana. Jeff claims that he didn't know that it was going to be marijuana, but regardless, even if you're just the driver for that guy, even if you're that guy, 4 pounds of marijuana in the whole scheme of things, that is not worthy of a life sentence. And I can't imagine anyone thinking that that is a correct sentence. And that is an extreme example, but that is the exact sort of thing that we're fighting against, that there are laws that would allow people to be sentenced to life without parole. Thinking about what Jeff did, I can think of a lot of people. I don't use cannabis now, but I did growing up, and I was certainly in rooms where something like that happened, and something like that could have happened to me. And so I think that's why, you look at this and you say, that's not just unjust for him, but that could be thousands of people. Even if it's just one example, it could happen to many, many people. And so our next panelist, Daryl Bertrand, is actually going to tell you of his case isn't quite as bad as Jeff's, but it's pretty bad. And he was the victim of a SWAT raid for trying to grow his own medicine. And he will tell you about that now. So here you go, Daryl.
Thanks, John. I'm going to sit down tonight because in this cold, I'm not moving around too well. But I'm grateful to be here. I'm glad to see all you guys here. This is awesome because when I first started doing stuff here with Show Me Cannabis, there'd be about 10, 12 people in the room. And now it's like 50 people or 100 every time. It's inspiring. Introduce myself. My name is Daryl Bertrand. I am the former owner of Ozark Mountain Playgrounds. It was a residential and commercial playground company with over 650 successful installations in the region and yearly sales between $200,000 and $350,000 a year. I'm going to tell you how I know firsthand how cannabis saved my life and how prohibition has ruined it. Then I'm going to throw in just a few facts at the end. Around 2003, I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, spondylolisthesis of the spine, and spinal stenosis, with a 13-millimeter gap in my spine, and it would move around. It never stayed in the same spot. Upon my diagnosis, doctors prescribed me painkillers, as you guys can all imagine, pretty much whatever I wanted, in all shapes and sizes and colors to deal with the pain. Within the subsequent 18 months of my diagnosis, I endured liver failure multiple times. That nearly killed me. Both with hospital stays of more than 5 to 7 days, the doctors attributed my liver failure to the medicine I was being prescribed. After my second liver failure, I knew my options were extremely limited. I sought advice from a local chiropractor and a family member who lives out west and is epileptic. He lives seizure-free in a medical marijuana state. I traveled out west and returned with seeds of specific strains of cannabis to treat my pain. I grew on my own medical cannabis for several years. And along with chiropractic care, I was able to work, grow a successful business, and be a productive member of society. In July of 2008, I had a bad slip and fall accident and broke my back. My L4 crushed my L5, and it was pretty much disintegrated. My L4 was literally sitting on my S1, which is your tailbone, and it could clearly be seen protruding out my lower back. You can say pretty easily at that point, my consumption of cannabis increased greatly from what it was at. I want to make it clear, I did not hide my cannabis use from my doctors. I don't suggest that anyone ever does. If your doctor is against it, then go find another doctor. The doctors were concerned with how I was consuming it due to the surgical procedure I was about to undertake. They were very much relieved and happy to know that I was using a vaporizer. In April of 2009, I was finally able to have a spinal fusion surgery to fix my back. It failed within a week, and I had to have a second emergency spinal fusion. 2 weeks later, I had 12 screws, 2 rods, and a plate put in my back. At some point during my time of being a producer of medical marijuana for myself, I took a few pictures of my grow to show a few family members out west. I deleted those pictures, but unless you clean your hard drive, they are still there. Subsequently, I had gotten a virus on my PC. I had used PC Outlet and Ozark for years for all my computer work. The store sent the photos from my hard drive to the local police drug task force, which is the Comet task force for Southwest Missouri. There were no identifiable markings in any of those photos to distinguish the location of this grow. They could have been taken anywhere. They investigated me for several months following the virus, and they never got the evidence to get a warrant until my vaporizer broke and I began rolling joints. I threw out an empty pack of zigzags in my trash. Apparently, they had been searching my trash weekly without my knowledge. The judge finally gave them the search warrant, and the rest is history. The raid occurred 4 days after my discharge from the hospital on my second spinal fusion. During the raid, it was clearly evident, once they had found the garden, that they were only concerned about seizing cash funds from the sales of cannabis. They used extremely abusive language to me and my family and threats of destroying everything if I didn't hand over $30,000 in cash they were looking for. And they were adamant about a certain amount of cash, you guys. It was pretty interesting, to say the least. I just had to have, according to them, since there was only about $300 in cash on me and my wife, and after about 30 minutes of talking it over with them, it became clear to them that it was actually a medical grow. And according to them, the first one they had ever seen. Needless to say, they were extremely upset that it wasn't a recreational for sale grow operation. Since I didn't have the cash, they went on a media smear campaign against me and my business. That my business, the exact words were, my business was just a front for a marijuana grow operation and that we didn't sell or install anything. If you came in the front door, you were there to buy marijuana. And I would sell to anyone over the counter. I was the headline news story on all the networks in Springfield for 3 days in all time slots. When they dropped the distribution charges against me, do you think they publicly announced it? Hell no. Before my bust, we had had a nice average home we rented in a nice neighborhood. I was saving money to purchase a home where my kids could go out and play. I owned my dream truck and had some nice possessions. We tried to keep the business going, but all attempts failed. We changed the name and moved the business. Everything failed. We now live in a low-income neighborhood that in the last year and a half, within a few houses of me and right across the street, I've had stabbings, 2 overdoses, an attempted murder that I broke up, and a gang fight. Needless to say, my kids don't go out and play anymore. Additionally, I was told by several lawyers when I got busted if I had $25,000, I would walk and not be a felon. So the saying goes, if you have the money and do the crime, you won't do the time. Since my plea deal and my wife's, I am now disabled and unable to work. It has taken my wife almost 2 years to find a minimum wage paying job with her college degree through a temp service. The conviction has made us and labeled us a different class of citizen. My choice for using cannabis wasn't something I did for pleasure. It was necessary for me to live a somewhat pain-free life, and without it, prescription pain meds would have surely killed me. Additionally, my wife doesn't smoke cannabis and had never even been in my grow room, but for some reason they found it necessary to charge her harder than me. It is clear now that the raid was asset forfeiture based, because I am almost positive if I had been selling and had the money they wanted, my wife would have never been charged. Finally, when I signed my plea deal of production of a controlled substance, if I had knew then what I know now, I would have never signed that plea deal. I would have gone to trial and used a personal rights defense along with jury nullification. Also, my plea said nothing in it about me losing my right to free speech. I have lost my right to bear arms, and I suffer daily in this cold from cruel and unusual punishment as I am in continuous pain and am unable to take anything to relieve that pain. If I take Big Pharma, it's simple, you guys, I more than likely would die. I could take natural, harmless alternative called cannabis, but then the state of Missouri will send me to jail for 8 years. I am not a criminal, no matter what label the prohibitionist put on me. There are thousands more like me here in Missouri, if not more. There are well over 115 million people in the U.S. that use or have used cannabis for whichever reason they choose. Do you really think the government can stop that many people from doing something freely in what is supposed to be the land of the free? Tax and regulate cannabis, and it has never killed anyone. Prohibition and the war on drugs has killed too many and needs to stop. It is a war that no one can win. In conclusion, I would like to add that the prohibition of marijuana has been sold to the citizens of this country as a big fat lie. Just look at who and how it became prohibited back in the 1930s. Who would want themselves associated with that racist and greedy behavior? We all know that what happened then couldn't happen now with our current structure of government. Here are a few statistical facts in closing. First, the prohibitionist will tell you marijuana is a gateway drug. The truth is every study on this theory done since 1972 has shown that to be a myth. And just what exactly is a theory? Secondly, they will tell you it has no medical value whatsoever. But did you know since 2003, the U.S. Department of Health has held several patents on medical marijuana and its benefits? But yet the DEA, a police unit, tells the doctors they are wrong and label it as a Schedule I drug. Finally, they will tell you teen use will increase. The truth is, under prohibition, the drug dealer does not ID. Teens say they can get marijuana easier than alcohol and tobacco that are regulated. And I know this firsthand from my daughters every week when they come home from school and tell me that they were offered marijuana at school again today. They've never been offered alcohol. They've never been offered cigarettes. Furthermore, in the states where cannabis is legal, medically or recreational, according to the CDC, the state leading in the decline of teen use is the state of Colorado as of 2012. I can go on all night with stats, and I could refute any argument brought on by any prohibitionist with science. If we were to use the science, cannabis would be legal and not be a Schedule I drug. It would be legal nationwide. And I want to thank John Payne for SMCR having me tonight. I want to thank you all for coming. And no matter what your issue on your side on this issue, I'm grateful you are here because it's an open discussion we need to have with everybody in order for things to change, or it's never going to change. And the last thing I want to say, and I feel weird doing this, and it's an unfortunate scenario of this cause, but it's not going to happen without money, you guys. I don't have a lot of money. I got some change in my pocket. I'm going to throw it in this donation box. It's the only way we're going to make it happen in this state and even nationally is by contributing. And if you can contribute regularly, see John afterwards, that would be great too. But I'm going to pass around this donation bucket, and I'd ask if you can, please put something in it. And that's all I got. I'm done.
We'll open it up for Q&A. We got about 40 minutes left, so anyone that has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and you can direct a single person or the entire panel, either way. Yeah, over here.
What needs to be done to have it on the ballot in 2014 as opposed to 2016?
Oh, I can wear this now. Okay. I would say the main thing is that the polling has to look good because if it's not about 60%, then a lot of the people that would be putting up large sums of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, because usually you want to have about $200,000 per congressional district, and so in Missouri that equals out to about 1.6 million, and really we have 8 congressional districts, but we're really kind of like 8.5, so it would be estimate about $2 million that it'll take to pass it in 2014, and it'd be about $500,000 just to get it on the ballot. So if the polling looks good, though, we do have the attention of a lot of the national level funders that have supported a lot of these campaigns. Peter Lewis, who he was the chairman of Progressive Insurance, he just passed away recently, but he had probably been the largest contributor to marijuana legalization causes and medical marijuana causes over the last 20 years or so. And he did leave a fair amount of that money of his estate to continue that fight. And we are working pretty closely with who was his advisor and now is the executor of that part of his estate, Graham Boyd. And so, if the polling looks good, then we're very likely to garner support from Graham and that estate. But if the polling's only like 50 to 55%, then it becomes a lot harder to justify. But if we get 60%, then what we'll do is we'll start going out and gathering signatures. And so we'll need signatures, and we'll need about 160,000 valid signatures in 6 of Missouri's 8 congressional districts. And this one probably would be, I think there are 2 congressional districts within about 30 miles of here, and both of them, I believe, would be districts that we need signatures in. So that, and then, financial contribution and collection of signatures would be the 2 biggest things.
That's what I was getting at, as far as the collection and signatures. When does that have to be done by?
The signatures have to be turned in by the first Sunday in May.
Right.
And where do you get the paperwork to start, getting out? How do you get that? And, so we can go out there and go, hey, I need your sig.
So yeah, we've already turned in the ballot, the initiatives to the Secretary of State, and they have, I think, 45 days to prepare ballot language. We turned it in December, So we're expecting it pretty much this week or next week probably that we'll have ballot language back, and then we can print up petitions and have people start gathering signatures. But we'll want to do polling first just to make sure it's viable. But legally, we can start collecting signatures once the Secretary of State's office approves it.
Okay, are you gonna bring those here and?
Yes, actually, probably, where's Glenn? Glenn probably be our point guy here. Glenn Corey helped organize this meeting tonight. I'd like to recognize him and say thank you for that. Also, thank you to the winery for hosting. Thank you to Larry there. But Glenn is probably going to be our point guy in this area. So get in touch with him, and Glenn talks to me on a very regular basis. And yeah, we'll have training sessions all over the state, and we'll probably have some down around here. And he would be the guy to talk to at that. Once we get started, he'll be like a coordinator for the area.
Once it's legal, I can figure out how to make wine out of it.
That I believe they are doing that in Colorado. So that is a good idea. Yeah.
What are you gonna call it?
I have some thoughts on whether 2014 or 2016. It seems to me 2014 is going to be a lot of energy spent by very conservative elements to turn the situation in Washington, well, we all probably mostly think for the worse. All right, I think there'd be a lot of extra opposition in that group of people that would probably be inclined to vote against such a measure. Who knows what 2016 brings, but that's another couple years away. Is there any thought to doing this on an off-year election, like let's say 2015, which then the election could be issue-oriented, and you have people going to the polls not because they're going to vote far against the marijuana laws, because while they're there voting far against Democrats and Republicans, if they were specifically going to the polls to vote far against marijuana, then you'd have a much higher percentage of people showing up to the polls to vote yes.
That is, there's certainly a lot of appeal to what you're saying. Amber, would you like to comment on this? Because I know in Columbia, when you guys had the decrim measure, there were several attempts and basically tried that approach. So.
Sure. The conventional experience is that we do better during presidential elections, which is, part of the weight that would go towards doing this for 2016 instead of 2014.
But that puts it into another election. My comment or question or thoughts is that why cannot this be done? It doesn't have to be done as part of a congressional or presidential election. If it were held in an off-year election, like let's say sometime in 2015 and maybe not in November or otherwise, if it was held then, the people going to the polls won't be there because they're voting far against candidates. They'll be there because they're voting far against marijuana. I can't believe that most people would go to the trouble of getting up, getting dressed, and going to the polls just to vote against it. I can't see a majority of people doing that. But I could see a majority of people doing that to vote yes if it was an issue-oriented election.
I would love for that to be the case. Unfortunately, history has not proven that to be the case. In any marijuana related initiatives that have gone to the state ballot, they've always done more favorably during the presidential elections. And the reason is because people come out for those elections. It would be great if we could get them to do a yes vote. Like I said earlier, I was part of the 2004 Columbia campaign to decriminalize and do medical marijuana. We had actually run a ballot initiative in 2003 that was in April. So it was an off election. It was kind of a weird time. And we spent an enormous amount of resources trying to get out the vote. We thought if we could get all the college students there, then we could pass it. And it was dismal. We got like 43%. And then we turned around in November of 2014 and got 62%. 2004, sorry. There was a 4 in there. And so basically, and we even in 2010, that was not a presidential election year, but when I was working on Prop 19 in California, again, we had the same idea that maybe this issue, but at the end of the day, when we looked at the numbers, it just didn't pan out. And so, maybe it would be hopeful to think that there is more there's more energy behind this topic at the moment, that we could get more people to come out for a yes campaign. But I think that we're pretty much constricted to doing a November campaign and an even year election. And it could be a presidential election. It could be this year. Again, we're going to have to wait and see what the polling numbers say.
I do hope that you'll open up your considerations to the possibility of perhaps putting this in 2015 instead, because my experience, and it's significant, would show that the people are going to come in 2014 or 2016 because it's an election for candidates. All right?
And the people who come out for those elections overwhelmingly are more supportive of this than people who come out to other elections. So people just, and part of it probably has to do with the youth vote, because overwhelmingly the people who support this issue are younger voters, so people under 30. And as much as we want them to come out for other elections, they either don't realize it, it's not on their radar, they just don't get out to do it, they do not vote if it's not. I know, I agree. It's just, I'm saying that that's what's panned out in the past in terms of history. Go ahead, Gary.
Some of this is about statistics and numbers, and I know this is sad to say, but each year it's the oldest generation that's really against us. And when it comes to voting, at least in my area, the people who vote are the older voting, especially on off-election years. So I think that is, I have to disagree with you. I think that's the wrong strategy, because I think you will come out to vote for it, but the young generation won't, and I think the older people will vote. So each year the numbers change drastically. As people die off, the new generation is more accepting of this. The older generation isn't, and that's just a fact. I mean, that's how the numbers bear out.
Young people.
So, and each year the numbers will change too. A year from now, the numbers will be more in our favor just in 1 year's time. Just think what it's going to be like in 2 years' time.
I'd also like to say, since you can't respond, I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for your courage in bucking the establishment that you're doing against. It's a very brave thing, and it's a very hard thing for you to do, and I know that it takes a lot of people.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is just a strategy. We're just trying to do the best we can on this. So, I mean, there's nothing that, believe me, it's been this has been thought out by a number of folks here, and we'll present the best strategy possible.
Let me make one more comment, and we probably can move on. The one other thing is that the thing is that it's just very hard to model something like that, because we have a lot of experience with presidential elections and congressional elections, and so pollsters have a very good track record of being able to go, okay, here's what we expect the turnout to be, here's what we expect to happen. But what you're talking about would be a very singular event, and so we don't have a lot of data to be able to go, here's what the turnout's going to be, and that makes it difficult to know.
The polls always talk about who's likely to vote.
Yeah, and that's it's hard to know with an election like that, with something like that.
Just to bear off that, and I understand what you were saying and agree, but a few years ago we didn't have the social networking that we have now, and even to poll that, we have Twitter, everything that everybody's connected to Facebook. You can run a poll off of that and see where you stand to even, maybe consider what he's saying or not. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, things are changing pretty dramatically. But I will say, you kind of got to take a conservative approach here, at least in the sense that the people that are going to be putting up a large sums of money, they're going to want to look at it and say, we know this is going to work. This is something that is established. And politics is sort of inherently conservative, not in a political sense, but in a, we have this is how it works, and this is the only way we're going to go because we know it works.
In your campaign, I heard you say something about money for education, and I would think between casinos, pot, alcohol, and everything else, maybe we could do away with property tax on houses.
You want to touch on the economic study you had done?
I shouldn't have the government landlord once a year saying, oh, well, 75% of your taxes are going to go to school that your kids don't go to. So I think, and there would be a lot of people who would be like, well, hell yeah, we're going to do away with property tax. I think that would be a good language for it. And also, as far as other drugs go, last year here at the lake we had some people that were murdered over prescription pills. And my thought is I would like to see, and I've actually called my representative about this, about maybe a law such as the Bruce Society law. Like where when someone is committing a crime
I am not worried about that in particular, but I will say, as to your point about the property taxes, you know, we did a study last year with Harvard economist Jeff Myron, and it showed that his estimates show we spend about $90 million enforcing cannabis laws in the state right now, and we could realize about $59 million in new tax revenue if it were taxed like alcohol. And now, you know, yes, it could that could be used to reduce property taxes. That would have to be.
Probably not gonna happen. I mean,
You'd have to. That's usually. Correct me if I'm wrong, but property taxes are mostly assessed at the local level, right?
Right.
So you'd have to take that one up with your local. You know,
At the same time,
change your.
casinos and lottery tickets and everything else go there, and then like for roads, my taxes are like $10.
Mostly gasoline taxes for roads.
School, you know, it's like, it's just crazy. I just.
Yeah, it's mostly a lot of that, especially for schools, is assessed at the local level. So that would be a local issue that we would have to address there. But anyone else want to comment on that?
Wasn't there a thing a few years back, Obama said something about the fines that you would get, you know, on the amounts of marijuana you have on you, or any of, as far as that goes, the don't waste my freaking time law, you know, by, like you said, there's so many people in prison over marijuana versus the dingbats out there running around with crack and nothing, it's like you said, it's so easy to grab a pot bus versus a crack bus, you know, and wasn't there a don't waste my time law over the marijuana?
Several years back, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, did write a memo about them, just don't bust them, patients' rights issue, et cetera, et cetera. Within 2 weeks later, they conducted the largest scale raids in history of the United States. And I think they hit like over 150 dispensaries out west in multiple states. So it was a big smoke screen. But recently, I believe it was in October or something, another letter came out. And for the most part, they have not done any raids unless you are breaking one of these 8 clauses that are in this new memo that came out. Unfortunately, within 2 weeks after that memo, they did do some busts in Denver, but I'm for marijuana. I'll be the first to tell you that those guys deserved everything they got because they were breaking all the rules out there in Colorado. There's regulations set for them to be doing it, and they took advantage of the system. And thankfully, it didn't hurt the cause as bad as it could have, because they were a bad name. They were a bad example for what was going on, and they don't need to be growing or selling marijuana if that's what they're gonna be conducting illegal activities and taking advantage of the system all over greed, money.
So I was just going to say to that this happens a lot in this political conversation. The opposition will come out and say, this is not a priority. We don't prioritize this. We don't really arrest people for marijuana. Well, we arrest the problem people that we already know are a problem for marijuana. And it's a smokescreen. It's basically a way of trying to appease people to say that, you know, we don't arrest people for misdemeanor marijuana possession, but if they're a prior offender, if they're a person of color and we don't like them, this is a great way for us to be able to go ahead and you know, put them away. And so a lot of that happened in medical marijuana states after the Holder announcement that he was referring to, that I think that you're referring to as well. And so that's the problem that we're coming up against, you know. It's consistency. So if that is your policy, if you really don't think people should be arrested for small amounts of marijuana, let's write it down, you know. So let's make it policy, let's make it consistent, let's make it go across the board. And so that's just, you know, the thing that you have to continue to press. Anytime that you hear the argument that, well, you know, it's not really that bad and the consequences. No, it is. People get screwed. And we can't stand for it. So that's what I would have to say about that.
You know, in big cities, you were saying, like St. Louis, that they may turn their back on it, but, you know, coming from a small town and a lot of small, you know, municipalities around here, I think they fund a good portion of their city government through fine collection, asset forfeiture, things like that, because they definitely don't
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think larger cities.
Local newspaper and a police report, and every week, 75% of every arrest that is made here is drug related.
Right.
Most of them are
Small.
marijuana.
Like I said, this is a small municipality.
Small, but
It's
That
not
tells
big.
you what the focus
But, you
is
know,
on.
yeah.
And I'm,
Like Lake Ozark, like Jesus Christ. I mean, nobody's taking it.
Let's sit in court one day, see how many, 75% of the cases will be marijuana related.
Right.
and I've worked, my original city was in Biloxi, Mississippi, which is a pretty big sized city, about 12 casinos at the time I left. It was very declining. We had a large gang population at one time. Crack cocaine was very big. So marijuana arrests were, again, very, to the point to where it was, you hoped you didn't find it because you didn't want to deal with it. It is truer in the smaller cities. I've worked at a university and now chief in a small town now. But a lot of that also comes from the culture of the community. Because most police officers, when they got into law enforcement, they were supposed to be out here protecting the people, and they're protecting them from rapists and robbers and evil drug fiends. And if that means marijuana drug fiends, it's still a drug to them. So it's also a reflection of the culture of the community. So that's why people need to be more outspoken now to say, hey, we're not worried about you going out there, excuse me, arresting somebody with 2 joints. We didn't have to actually pass it in my city. We actually kind of quote unquote decriminalized marijuana to where it's simply an ordinance ticket, and the fine is the same amount as no container of alcohol. So it doesn't go onto a state record. It's a city ordinance, so it's the same level as having your dog off a leash. So I up in Lincoln County. So we've decriminalized it as much as I legally can, under city policy and through the department. But that's why, because smaller departments, with Gary and them, they have shootings by the dozen a weekend. So the people are like, this is what's more important. So for a lot of sheriffs and a lot of police chiefs and some departments, that's how they justify themselves to their community, is that, hey, look what we're doing to get this off the streets. Well, a lot of times, like in my area, I don't think anyone's impressed that I get a DUI over a weekend, or 2 DUIs, or 3, or if I bust somebody with drugs, or on January 1 when I could have arrested 16 kids for minor in possession, instead just made them all pour out their alcohol. That's another thing. Back in the day when I first got in law enforcement, I thought that was just spectacular to arrest underage kids with alcohol. I don't know what I thought I was doing, crusade against alcohol. But nowadays, we pour the alcohol out. I've actually had it to where I pull kids over, had them call their parents and told their parents, hey, here's what's going on. I'm pouring the alcohol out so you can deal with it when you get home. So that's a culture change that's now decided, that a lot of law enforcement are realizing, hey, you know what, let parents deal with the whole alcohol issue. We ain't got time for it. Pour it out. If they're not drunk, let them call their parents, whatever, and marry on their way. Same way with marijuana. I think that law enforcement has to realize that we're not saving anyone from it, that the community's not out there, going after us. I mean, honestly, I think I could make a marijuana arrest every day in my town, and at no point, no one's thinking that I've, have stopped the illegal drug trade in Missouri. So that's the change of the culture within law enforcement that has to take place. But you have to remember, the idea that law enforcement has of what the job is what they think the community is wanting them to do. So that's pressure you need to put on your mayor, your city board, and let them know that. Because unlike a sheriff, a police chief's appointed, so you can't pressure the elected officials to make a change in that.
I was wondering, do you find it that more people are in support of legalization efforts over decriminalization efforts? And because I was been researching stuff that's going on in Colorado, and I know that terms like legalization and regulation are just fancy words for taxation. And I noticed that in Colorado, they're worried about taxation creating a higher price than the black market, or whatever you want to call it, drug dealers, marijuana dealers would charge illegally. So if that becomes the case, wouldn't it kind of
Speed focus.
be counterproductive to tax it so much to where it was more expensive than a dealer would sell it to you illegally, because then people would just go back and it would just become one final hole?
Those are good points. I think, and John, I feel is probably itching to respond to this as well. I would say that in terms of the semantics, that it's negligible in terms of the differences of opinions on decrim versus regulation. And yes, it is regulation and taxation, which is are dirty words to some pieces of the population. And I mean, what it boils down to in terms of the taxation, we're still figuring it out. We don't have the solutions yet. I would say that personally, I feel like the tax is probably too high in Colorado, and it has led to the legal price being more than the black market price. I think that those things are just gonna kind of, like, over time, we're gonna have to figure out where the balance is so that we can have a price on the market that is, you know, reasonable to people, that is legal. I think most people want to be part of a legal market. They don't like the illegal market. It's kind of dirty. Yeah, Daryl wants to say something.
It's a supply and demand issue also right now, is they didn't get their licenses to grow for the legal in time to produce enough for the demand. So the supply is going to catch up with the demand in a few months when these guys can actually grow and produce enough. Right now they're in a shortage because they all got their permits very late in the game, and were told very late that they could actually sell recreational.
I think I can maybe show a fail-safe to the bill that we have written, they have written. Our fail-safe is, if ours passes, we'll be able to grow our own. We don't have to depend on it.
They can grow their own in Colorado as well. They can. So I mean, I think that will go some ways in preventing the recurrence of the black market in Colorado. But yes, that's also something that we.
That starts up and they start growing, everybody gets to grow their own, and they won't need the illegal.
What about cannabis and the FDA?
Well,
I mean,
oh,
you can prescribe amphetamines to young kids.
hold on. We'll get to that question in just a second. Let me finish handling this one. With regards to the reason that there was a shortage in Colorado, it's partly the reason Daryl said, but it's also partly because they kind of created an artificial scarcity by the fact that the only people that can be involved in the recreational market in Colorado for the next year are people that already own medical marijuana dispensaries. They basically bought off the medical marijuana industry because Prop 19 in California, the medical marijuana industry had opposed full legalization because it meant a loss of profits to them. And so in Colorado, they bought off the industry by saying, okay, so yes, there'll be new entrants to the industry, but only after a year. So you get a year of basically, sky-high profits for yourself, and then you'll have to deal with new competition. And so because of that, there is limited supply, and that has screwed up the prices, I think. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think more people, the polling shows more people support it with taxes than without. I mean, I'm a free market libertarian guy. I would prefer it if nothing was taxed. But that's unfortunately not the reality of politics in America. But okay, so yeah, you had a question about the FDA.
Yes. What's their opinion on it? Can you go get a generic marijuana?
That'll take federal reform, and basically the thing is that the DEA, who as I believe Daryl said, DEA, they're not doctors. They have these are not medical professionals, but they have the complete ability to say marijuana is not medicine. Marijuana is a Schedule I substance. It has high potential for abuse and no medical potential, and that is the current policy of the federal government. And so until that changes, and that'll take, it could be an act of Congress, it could be
Executive order.
Whatever. They have benefits.
I'm not going to say that they don't.
But the pain. It's just nasty, right?
According to the federal drug scheduling, marijuana has no medical use, and it's Schedule I, and that's not going to be changed until we start changing things at the state level. And it's going to be like alcohol prohibition, where the states say, hey, federal government, you are really, really wrong, and we're just going to go ahead without you. And that's part of why it's so important to work on stuff in Missouri, because people have said, around the country, if Missouri does it, then the federal government has to pay attention. So,
like you said, there's 22 states, I think we talked about today, that have medicinal marijuana laws. So the population of the United States is starting to say, yes, there are medical uses. I mean, when you're talking at almost 50% of United States are now recognizing that at the state level. It's going to make the federal government look at it. I've always questioned why it's remained Schedule 1 and why there's been such a, I guess, delay and more medicinal recommendations from AMA and places like that. The AMA this year slightly lessened their stance, but still is against it. I attended my undergraduate work with Stanford University of Mississippi, which has a large marijuana grow research facility there. And I've always believed that pharmaceutical companies are trying to figure out a way for them to be able to corner the market and be involved in it. Because if you think about it like this, if I could grow aspirin at my house, or if I could grow acetaminophen at my house, how much of a hit Tylenol, Bayer, places like that would take if I could grow that at my own home. If the medical reasons and usages are available and the pharmaceutical companies can't benefit from it because I'm growing it in my basement, then they're probably less likely to get behind it because, again, you're talking a lot of money. I mean, look at the money that Colorado brought in just over the week, their first weekend. So I believe that the pharmaceutical companies are tied into the scheduling of drugs because if you notice any time that they need it changed for some reason, things do get changed. Yeah, so that's they want the. I mean, there's people within pharmaceutical companies that I know that work in the St. Louis pharmaceutical fields that pretty much say yes, that each company in America has worked on some type of pharmaceutical marijuana, and that's why they want doctors to hold off until they can actually figure out a way to have the market instead of it being something we can grow in our own homes.